Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm ABC's Devin Dwyer in Washington, joined by Mary Alice Parks, our Deputy Political Director Rick Klein. Great to have you guys here for our State of the Union hangover show. It was a late night for everybody, and there was a lot of news to digest. We're going to get to some of that in just a second, but the president just making a little bit of news, traveling across town here to the State Department to attend a conference on defeating ISIS, even though he already declared that ISIS has been defeated. He did assemble with global ministers who are fighting as part of that global network to defeat ISIS. We have a little bit of sound. The president just took a victory lap on the significant pushback of ISIS, also defended his plan to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Everyone must do their part and contribute their fair share. We must also recognize that immigration security is national security, and that foreign fighters must not gain access into our nations.
And let's go to Connor Finnegan. He's our State Department reporter who's over there for the event today. Connor, I guess this is sort of an acknowledgement by President Trump that while the big military campaign against ISIS has been, wound down, this fight against sort of the rebel-style fighters will continue for some time.
Yeah, that's right, Devin. President Trump talking about the remnants of ISIS remaining both in Syria and Iraq. He addressed this global coalition to defeat the terror group just 2 months after announcing the U.S. would withdraw from Syria. But today saying that, the U.S. hadn't fully defeated them, that we were not at 100%, saying that he expected that announcement to come perhaps as early as next week. But it's those remnants that he talked about that has all of these ministers here concerned. There was that terror attack in Manbij in Syria that killed 4 Americans last month. It's those sleeper cells that will continue to be a problem for both Iraq and Syria for the folks that live on the ground there.
And as we've heard time and again, and you've heard, Connor, from officials, the need for vigilance, the need to keep that pressure on is certainly important. Thanks for that reporting, Connor. We'll keep an eye on those developments. But the big story, political story in town that is sort of, we can't even put our arms around, is what's going on over in Virginia. It is messy, Rick. First, we were hearing about the governor over the weekend embroiled in this racial controversy. Then it was the lieutenant governor got in some hot water. And today it's the attorney general. All 3 Democrats in line of succession in Virginia are in hot water.
There's a technical political science term for what we're witnessing. It's bananas. It's beyond the pale of anything we've ever seen. You've got 3 individuals, 1, 2, 3 in the line of secession, the current governor and the 2 people that might succeed him, as you say, all Democrats. Number 4, by the way, is a Republican, all in hot water for different things from their pasts, of different potential severity and different cross pressures. In 2 cases, in the cases of the governor and the attorney general, we have an admission of dressing in blackface at some point in the past and some degree of apology for it and owning up to the actions. And the man in the middle, the lieutenant governor, who take over if the governor is forced out, as many Democrats want him to be, who now has a credible accuser who has now come out publicly. Her name is Dr. Vanessa Tyson, and she is an academic, someone that has written books on black representation, presents herself as a Democrat, and she is recounting publicly now a story about an alleged sexual assault from the 2004 DNC convention 15 years ago. The lieutenant governor has denied it vehemently and questioned her motives in this, but she now stands out there, and this is a lot going on in Virginia, a crisis now of leadership, a meltdown in the state government, and in addition to that, I think a lot of pressure on Democratic presidential candidates and on anyone involved in politics to figure out how you would deal with this crisis.
And Mary Alice, it scrambled the political calculus for Democrats in the state because everyone was so quick to condemn Ralph Northam, but now they're having sort of second thoughts about whether they need to condemn Mark Herring.
Well, these are 3 very different scenarios. The Attorney General, the 3rd in secession, he admitted this wasn't some gotcha moment with him. Basically, reading the tea leaves, seeing that he could actually be governor of the state in just a few days, the way the chips fall, he came forward with something that he felt was important to come forward with. I think that's an important distinction to draw. But the hanging over all of this is just where we are in the country. We're talking about Richmond and Virginia, a state with really complicated past, with a tough history with race, a state where Ralph Northam talks a lot when he was governor and during his campaign about the slave history there. And just a few years ago, we had the protest there in Charlottesville. I mean, this is hanging over all of it, race and identity and the relationship between the African-American community and the Democratic Party.
And let's bring in someone from Virginia's African-American community now. Kofi Annan, he's the president of the NAACP chapter in Fairfax County, Virginia, joins us now by Skype. Kofi, it's great to see you and have you with us today. How are you making sense of all of this, an unbelievable series of bombshells?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is really a really tough time for us as an organization, as an African American community in general, because as soon as we're starting to wrap our heads around one controversy and with the governor, then here comes two more just within a matter of days. So we're really still trying to get to the bottom of things and trying to figure out exactly how we need to approach the issue with the Attorney General. But with regard to the Governor Northam, we have made our position clear that this is clearly a clear violation of trust, and we don't think that there's any way that we can come back from this. There's the cloud, those images standing next to or wearing a Ku Klux Klan robe. There's just no way that we could foresee ourselves working with him going forward, because it's just quite different from what the Attorney General admitted to today. Even though we do appreciate him coming out, and we're not exactly clear, haven't decided exactly how we're going to handle that. We do want to stick to the fact that the Governor Northam does need to resign because he has violated trust, and that we can't necessarily walk away from.
Are you comfortable in that scenario, Mr. Annan, with seeing the Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, take over that position, given the allegations that are on the table right now? What needs to be done to investigate that? And would you be okay with him becoming governor this afternoon?
Well, we think that the accuser does need to be heard. We don't want to necessarily ignore the fact that these allegations are out there. We don't want to do anything that would impede that. She deserves to have her voice be heard, but at the same time, we don't want to distract away from the fact that we have called for Governor Northam to resign, and he should resign. He should have resigned the day that these pictures went public. The fact that it's still continuing to go on several days later, and is really a slap in the face to our intelligence, and the fact that he went back and tried to retract the statement. None of that makes any sense. No one believes that anything that he said on that second day is credible. We don't necessarily feel it's a sincere apology after basically lying. What it's obviously seems like he was lying about that if he was going to come right back and say that the next day. So he needs to go. That needs to be step one. And if the woman that alleged the incidents that happened with Justin Fairfax, well, she needs to have her day as well. But in the interim, he needs to take over as governor.
What's the potential distinction in your mind, just to be clear, about what the Attorney General is saying versus what the governor is saying? I understand the context of the photo. He says he's not in the photo. He is admitting to having put shoe polish, as he says, on his face as part of a dance contest to impersonate Michael Jackson. In the case of Mark Herring, he's also talking about dressing up as a rapper as a late teenager, as a 19-year-old. Is it just the existence of the photo and the way the governor handled it initially on Friday and Saturday, or is there something just qualitatively different about the circumstances that are being described between the Attorney General and the governor?
Well, in order to believe everything that was said on Saturday, we would have to believe that the governor saw the images in this yearbook photo, never looked at his yearbook photo, looked at it when it came out on Friday, took some time, admitted it was his, that it was him, apologized for it, and then 24 hours later took all of that back. And that's just not very credible to us. So we do believe that his first admission is the one that we're going to stick to, and we don't feel like just taking it back matters. And as far as comparing it to what Attorney General Herring did, I'm not going to excuse that. I think it was wrong. I think he was right for apologizing for it. I guess the difference would be, one is clearly an attempt to either on you're mocking African Americans, been dressing up in blackface, and you're standing next to a Klan member, which is there's clearly a terrorist organization, the organization that's killed thousands of Americans and terrorized the African American community. And so to appear in a picture with a Klansman, or to possibly even be the person in the Klansman robe, that's clearly racist. And that's clearly something that's different from dressing up to perform in a context. Not that either is okay, but one is clearly meant to intimidate and harass African Americans, and the other one is potentially just highly insensitive.
And Kofi Annan, before we let you go, is there sort of a big picture lesson in this moment for us as a country, as you see it? Setting aside the politics of Virginia and the extraordinary drama of this scandal, if you will. What's your takeaway from the discussion of blackface, the discussion of the things you were just talking about, the fact that so many white men in leadership in Virginia have been caught up in this? Is there something we can take away from all that?
That we need higher standards. We need higher standards from all of our politicians on both sides of the aisle. We've Democrats have been criticizing President Trump for some of his character flaws and some of the misdeeds and things that he's been caught doing and saying over since he's been running for office. But the Democrats, if they want to claim a higher ground, they also need to match their words when it comes to the members of their own party and accept the consequences that go along with that.
Kofi Annan, the president of the NAACP chapter in Fairfax County, Virginia. Thanks so much for coming on, sir, and for sharing your views. I would love to have you back. I know this story certainly has legs. It's going to be quite a talker. And we should say Graham Northam, as we have been talking about here on the show, is a one-term governor. So
right.
He doesn't have really any incentive. There's no political pressure on him in terms of a re-election campaign to change tune.
I mean, that's just the rule in Virginia.
Right.
You're term limited out. I keep wondering if there's some extreme version of events here. Could the legislature there in Virginia say, let's just have a total redo?
Let's start over with statewide officials. No, a part of this is the lack of accountability with voters. They were all, though, elected just a year ago. So they have 3 more years on their term. And I'll tell you, in talking to some of the campaigns, the idea of having to campaign in the state of Virginia, a battleground state.
You mean the 2020 presidential
campaigns, thinking
right.
about that with the sitting governor or maybe the lieutenant governor as elevated if the allegations prove credible, or now the attorney general. This is a bad situation in a critical state, as Mary Alice pointed out, a state that's got history and a present that's still grappling with this. This is the state of Charlottesville, the state that was the capital of the Confederacy in Richmond. So there's a lot of real history that's being lived out there, and a reckoning for a whole lot of people involved.
Shifting gears a little bit now, up on Capitol Hill today, a day after the State of the Union, a lot of attention on a topic the president did not mention last night, the topic of gun violence, school safety, school shootings in this country, something that has marked his first 2 years of his term, something he claims to have done a lot about. Didn't mention it last night, Mary Alice, but a very significant moment today as the Democratic-led House now convened its first hearings in 8 years on gun violence.
Well, the House convened the first hearing on gun violence in 8 years because Democrats took control of the House and made that a priority. And it did really highlight a huge distinction between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Like you said, the president not mentioning this topic last night, and then Democrats making it a priority. And there were a number of issues like that. Climate change was another one, prescription drugs, some of things on health care. It was amazing sort of to watch the list and to look at that list of hearings just this week that Democrats were going to follow through on Capitol Hill, and compare that side by side with what the president said were his priorities. Just 2 different realities.
It was an emotional morning of testimony on Capitol Hill. I was up there. I talked to some of the students who were testifying, both from the March for Our Lives kids, the Parkland students, that school shooting coming up on its 1-year anniversary a little bit later this month, and also met a woman named Savannah Lundquist. She's from Virginia. She was in school. She was raped when she was in college. She said she wished she had her gun. She would not have been raped. A different perspective. She says she's not a member of the NRA, not a Republican. Caught up with her as well. Here's a little bit of our conversation with those students.
Our young people showed up bright and early, got here the second the doors opened, and just filled the room. We had over 150, 200-something people show up, and I mean, it's magical when you're able to be present and show that this is important to us. The first hearing in 8 years should shock everyone that we haven't been talking about this entire time.
Now, what's kind of the first order of business as Democrats start to draft legislation you want to see them put on the table?
The first order of business is to talk about the actual reality of gun violence, because what we were having in there was a conversation about the reality of gun violence and then a bunch of non-arguments. Universal background checks, H.R. 8, is the first step forward, but it's only a step. And we need to talk about legislation that is necessary in actually saving lives. And the first step is to actually address the reality of gun violence.
Charlie, you feel pretty confident that had you had your weapon, had you perhaps broken the law in that state, or the law had been such that you could have the gun, that you would not have been raped.
I absolutely believe that, yes. I mean, you can never say with 100% certainty about anything, but I'm confident enough in my abilities with a firearm that I am not concerned. I want to be able to go to campus and not have to worry about being sexually assaulted. I want Aaliyah, who's the Parkland survivor that's here, to be able to go to her high school and not worry about getting shot. We all want a safer world.
All right, great to hear from Savannah Lundquist there, also from Matt Deitch and Charlie Mursky with the March for Our Lives group, and our thoughts are with that community as they mark the one-year anniversary next week on February 14th.
And we've just seen a real political stronghold there. Moms coming out in force this last election. I was surprised how many people at political events and campaign rallies on the Democratic side, particularly, say that they were willing to vote on this issue and this issue alone. It's becoming more of a political force that politicians have to reckon with.
And a hearing today was a first step in that movement. We know that gun violence will likely be a topic in the Democratic primary as well for 2020. The field, we keep saying, like a broken record, getting more crowded and potentially getting even more crowded very soon with Beto O'Rourke, the Texas Congressman, Rick, dipping his toe in sort of yesterday with Oprah. Quite an interview.
Yeah, Oprah almost begging him to run and doing the kind of interview that, you know, everyone wishes you could do in some way. Just keep asking it and asking it and asking it. But Beto O'Rourke didn't lean back from this. He seemed to lean in and put himself for the first time on a timeline, saying by the end of February, maybe a little bit faster than our reporting had indicated before, and confirming that he's very seriously considering this. And Oprah all but confirming that there's a very powerful person that might be willing to offer some support.
And here's a little bit of that interview with Oprah Winfrey.
No, have you given yourself a deadline? I'm serious about that. Have you given yourself a...
And the serious answer is really soon. It is really soon, before the end of this month. Someone's asking for right now, but this is before the end of the month, but there are many other days after this.
And Mary Alice, if he gets in the race, where will he fit in this field? He was sort of the young phenom of 2018, but if he jumps in, he'd be up against a much more experienced crowd of Democratic candidates.
Also, ideologically, where exactly does he fit? In Texas, he was sort of heralded by the Democratic Party as being this huge, bold progressive, but a progressive in Texas isn't exactly a progressive in California or in New York. So where he lines up on some of those key policy issues in the Democratic Party will be interesting. But he proved himself as a mega fundraiser that was able to bring in just unbelievable cash, and also someone that really energized and inspired young people across the country. I mean, I was in a lot of states leading up to November and would get asked about that race in Texas no matter where I was.
And we know that Amy Klobuchar, the senator from my home state, Minnesota, Democratic senator, says she plans to make some sort of an announcement on Sunday in Minnesota in the snow, of all places. We'll see what she has to say. But
your
also,
accent kind of came through with snow.
You betcha there. For sure. But we do have to touch on one of the candidates who has already declared, another senator, Elizabeth Warren. Rick, this is a stunner. She has been battling the controversy around her claims of Native American heritage for some time, but now overnight, the Washington Post uncovered quite a document.
Yeah, and this document is the first recorded incident that we've seen emerge publicly where she affirmatively states her race, her ethnicity, and writes in the box for race, American Indian.
In her handwriting.
In her own handwriting in block letters from 1986. This was her registration for the State Bar of Texas. Now, her campaign folks are saying, look, this is not a document that would be publicly available under most circumstances. You'd have to FOIA it in some way or get a Freedom of Information Act request or otherwise release it. So they're saying it doesn't prove in any way that she was using this to get ahead. But that affirmative declaration is different than what she has said before, which is basically that she didn't correct what she now views as misperceptions around her ethnicity. And we've seen her struggle with this question frankly, before the president started with his nickname, his very racist nickname for her. She's been trying to explain this. We saw a DNA test by her shortly before the election. She's apologized to the Cherokee Nation. She's now apologized a second time for this. And Mary Alice and I have been talking all day about how the difficulty this presents for her candidacy as she tries to get out of the way of her own words and her own descriptions.
Once the primary really gets rolling, though, I mean, are other Democrats, Mary Alice, do you think, going to attack her on this, or are they going to leave it to Trump?
I don't see that anytime soon. This is tricky. Identity is complicated and messy, and I think we're seeing that play out in this one campaign. You know, she has tried to sort of weave this balance of saying this is my family's story, something that she carries with her in her heart, that she feels like was a part of the traditions of her family, but understanding that that's an entirely different conversation than claiming minority status or how that relates to affirmative action at an Ivy League school. And so it is a complicated question, complicated for a Democratic Party that is grappling with questions of race and identity politics and has been championing this idea of representational politics and the importance of having a diverse field. It's hard to see how she can sort of weave all that. I don't have the answer for it. There's just going to continue to be growing skepticism about her campaign.
And there is still a whole bunch of campaign ahead, so we will see. There is a lot of time for her to try to right the ship, if you will. Great to see you, Rick, Mary Alice. I know we're mid-show here, but you guys have a lot to do, so you're going to duck out. We're going to bring in now Rachel Scott. She's one of our new White House reporters. Come on in, Rachel.
Hey.
And we're going to do the swap of the mics real time here.
Yeah.
We're going to do real time because you guys have got to go.
You
and
too.
Rachel, you were taking a close look last night. Well, we were on with these guys. You were checking the facts of the State of the Union. Let's start with.
Take a mic.
Oh, I'm good.
State of the Union fact check. You've got a mic.
I got extra mic.
You've got two mics. Okay. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Mary Alice. Let's start with the first fact check of the day from this State of the Union address dealing with taxes. It's tax season. You're probably starting to do your taxes. We have a new tax law, and so you took a look at one of the president's big claims on taxes.
Yeah, and I think we may have the clip to roll for everyone so they can hear
Let's
first.
take a listen.
We passed a massive tax cut for working families and doubled the child tax credit.
Yeah.
Okay, so true, false, maybe?
This one's just lacking, and it's begging for a little bit more context here. We know that the GOP tax plan initially plans to reduce taxes for everyone across all incomes, including middle-class Americans. And this is some good news, right? As we look ahead to tax season, the Tax Policy Center said that most Americans, 8 out of 10, are actually going to see their taxes reduced this year.
So most people on the bottom line with the accountants coming up now, April 15th is the deadline, of course, will see a reduction of their taxes. Good news.
That's really good news. About $1,600, they're saying. So that's going to be some really good news. But that's just the immediate effect. When you look at the long term, right? A lot of studies show that the people at the top and corporations are going to benefit most.
The longer term benefit, and that's in large part, as you know, because the corporate tax cuts were made permanent. The individual tax cuts were set to expire in a few years, so long term, a little bit of a wash. Also interesting, you looked at Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, also talking taxes last night. In her response, she had an interesting claim on that as well. Let's take a listen to her.
The Republican tax bill rigged the system against working people. Rather than bringing back jobs, plants are closing, layoffs are looming, and wages struggle to keep pace with the actual cost of living.
All right, so interesting claims there. She said the layoffs are looming, tax cuts not as good as we were told, job losses ahead. Sounded much more ominous than some of the numbers. Where do we shake on that?
Yeah, again, begging for a little bit more context with this one again. So, you know, there's nothing that points to, there's no evidence that says this Republican tax bill is leading to these looming layoffs and these plant closures, which we know are happening, but there is no direct correlation, no evidence. But I do want to talk about the wages here because this is something that's really interesting. We know that unemployment, right, has been low during the Trump administration, but the real average wage, which accounts for inflation, has not budged in decades. The Pew Research came out with a study that said the real average wage has the same purchasing power as it did 40 years ago, despite the cost of living increasing. And so this has obviously brewed a fight.
So even as we
for
see
minimum
average
wage.
monthly wages going up a little bit, according to the Labor Department, Pew took a look more holistically and said when you balance out purchase power, she's actually right that purchase power is not what it used to be. Interesting stuff. So on both counts there, lacking a little bit of context. Let's wrap it up today with another claim the president made about the border. He's headed, we know, on Monday now to El Paso, Texas for his first campaign rally of 2019. It's also the epicenter of this fight on immigration. Here's what he had to say about the safety and security of El Paso. Take a listen.
The border city of El Paso, Texas, used to have extremely high rates of violent crime, one of the highest in the entire country, and considered one of our nation's most dangerous cities.
All right, so most dangerous cities in America?
False. This
False,
one is
okay.
just false. And it's maybe not the best way to start his first time having a campaign rally in El Paso, because we're seeing a lot of elected officials and even some police officers come out against this, and Republicans come out against this. This is just simply not true. I've been pouring through the data, and this was initially first reported by the El Paso Times that fact-checked this. But crime has actually increased 17%, okay? And we're looking at the years 2006 and 2011. Between those years, that time frame is really important because it accounts for before that fence was built and the 2 years following it. And so again, we saw a 17% increase in violent crimes according to the FBI.
So when the wall was built around El Paso, there didn't seem to be a sharp reduction at the time, and right now El Paso is one of the safest countries in the United States, and it was before.
Exactly, and that's exactly what a lot of elected officials, including sheriffs, are pointing to. Now, I talked to the sheriff's office today. One of the lead sheriffs, Richard Wiles, gave us a statement and said that the president is just pointing to narrative falsehoods, right, to encourage his fight for a border wall. He said that El Paso has always been one of the safest communities, and we have seen that to be true. If we look before that fence was built from 2005 to 2007, for a city of its size, violent crime rates were actually some of the lowest that we saw in the country.
Very interesting stuff as the president heads to El Paso on Monday. I know you'll be following that, Rachel. We have the full fact check from our fact check team on abcnews.com. I think something over a dozen fact checks from statements on both sides of the aisle last night, so go there and check it out. Great to have Rachel Scott with us today here in the briefing room. Great to have you joining us today for the conversation. Hope you'll be back here tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern Time. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you then.